At my grandson's gender reveal party, my daughter-in-law pointed to a chair in the far corner of the yard and said, "That's your spot, far from the pictures." I just smiled. But when the photographer announced the party's sponsor, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. Chapter 1: The Humiliation. I'm Denise, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd experienced every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. Nothing prepared me for the moment my own daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and told me where I belonged at my grandson's gender reveal party. The morning started like any other Sunday. I'd spent hours preparing homemade cookies shaped like baby bottles, carefully decorating each one with pink and blue icing. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but I wanted everything perfect for little Marcus's big day. This would be my first grandchild, and I'd been counting down the days since my son David called to invite me. I arrived at their house in the suburbs carrying my cookie tin and a gift bag containing a hand-knitted blanket. I'd spent 3 weeks working on it, choosing the softest yarn I could find. The house was already buzzing with activity when I pulled into the driveway. Caterers moved in and out, carrying elaborate floral arrangements and what looked like professional photography equipment. Mila answered the door wearing a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her smile was picture-perfect, the kind she always wore when other people were watching. "Oh, Denise, you made it," she said, though her tone suggested she'd been hoping otherwise. Come in, come in." I stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. The living room had been transformed into something from a magazine spread. Pink and blue balloons cascaded from the ceiling, and there was an elaborate dessert table that made my homemade cookies look embarrassingly simple. "Where should I put these?" I asked, holding up my tin. Mila's eyes flicked to the cookies, and I caught the slight grimace before she covered it with another smile. "Oh, how sweet. Just set them anywhere. We have the catering handled, but I'm sure someone will appreciate them." The first wave of guests began arriving, and I recognized most of them. Mila's college friends, David's coworkers, some neighbors I'd met at previous gatherings. They all looked polished and put together in a way that made me suddenly conscious of my department store dress and comfortable shoes. I found David in the kitchen, looking stressed as he arranged champagne glasses. My son had always been handsome, but success had given him a confidence that sometimes felt foreign to me. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Mom, you look great," he said, giving me a quick hug. "Thanks for coming early to help set up." "Of course, sweetheart. Anything you need me to do." Before he could answer, Mila appeared beside us. "Actually, David, we should probably start directing people to their seats. The photographer wants to begin soon." That's when it happened. Mila turned to me with that same plastic smile and gestured toward the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. "Denise, I've set up a special seat for you. It's right over there by the fence." I followed her pointing finger and felt my stomach drop. There, at the very back of the yard, sat a single folding chair. It was positioned so far from the main seating area that I'd barely be able to see the festivities, let alone participate in them. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mila's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Well, we have limited seating for the main event, and this way you'll have a nice quiet spot away from all the chaos. Plus, it's better for the photos this way." The words hit me like a physical blow. Away from the photos. She wasn't just excluding me from the celebration, she was erasing me from the memory of it entirely. I looked at David, waiting for him to say something to defend me, to tell his wife that his mother deserved better than a folding chair in exile. But he was already turning away, distracted by something else Mila was whispering in his ear. "That's very thoughtful," I managed to say, though my throat felt tight. I made my way to the designated chair, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I sat down, I could hear the laughter and conversation from the main group, but it felt like it was coming from another world. Other guests kept arriving, all of them guided to proper seats with proper tables. I watched Mila greet each one with enthusiasm, making sure they had drinks and appetizers. No one offered me anything. The photographer, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair, began setting up her equipment. She moved through the crowd with professional efficiency, taking candid shots of the guests mingling. When her lens swept in my direction, she paused, looking confused. "Excuse me," she called out to Mila. Should I include the lady in the back for the family photos? I felt every eye in the yard turn toward me. The conversations quieted, and I could practically feel the pity radiating from the other guests. Some of them knew me, knew I was David's mother, and I could see the confusion on their faces. Mila barely glanced in my direction. Oh, that's fine. She prefers to stay back there. We'll do the family photos with the immediate family. Immediate family. I wasn't even considered immediate family at my own grandson's gender reveal. I sat there for the next hour, watching my son and daughter-in-law pose for photo after photo. They looked radiant, surrounded by friends and chosen family. Mila's parents had flown in from California and were prominently featured in every shot. Her mother kept adjusting Mila's dress and offering suggestions to the photographer. When it came time for the actual reveal, everyone gathered around a large black balloon. David and Mila held a pin between them, both grinning with anticipation. The photographer captured every angle as they popped the balloon, releasing a shower of pink confetti. "It's a girl!" someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in cheers. From my distant chair, I watched my son embrace his wife, watched them accept congratulations and well wishes from everyone around them. I wanted to run to them to share in their joy, to hold my son and tell him how happy I was. Instead, I sat frozen in place, feeling like an intruder at my own family's celebration. As the party continued, I noticed how naturally the other guests ignored me. It was as if Mila had somehow communicated that I was to be overlooked, forgotten. The only person who acknowledged my presence was David's coworker, Janet, who brought me a plate of food after the buffet opened. "How are you holding up, Denise?" she asked quietly, sitting on the grass beside my chair. "I'm fine," I lied, because what else could I say? Janet looked like she wanted to say more, but then Mila appeared with her bright, dangerous smile. "Janet, we need you in the group photo with the office crew," she said sweetly. And just like that, I was alone again. The sun was setting when the photographer started packing up her equipment. As she passed by my corner of exile, she stopped and looked at me with what seemed like recognition. "Excuse me, but didn't you teach photography at the community center about 5 years ago?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes, I did. For about 3 years." Her face broke into a genuine smile. "I thought so. I'm Sarah Chun. I took your beginner's class when I was just starting out. You probably don't remember me, but you gave me some advice that changed everything for me." Suddenly, the day felt a little less dark. "Sarah, of course I remember you. You had such a natural eye for composition. You encouraged me to pursue it professionally. I've been doing weddings and events full-time for 2 years now, thanks to you." We talked for a few more minutes and I felt human again. When she mentioned she was the photographer Mila had hired, something shifted in her expression. "Actually," Sarah said, lowering her voice, "there's something you should know about today's event." My heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "The company that sponsored this party, that paid for all the decorations and catering? Haven Enterprises. Do you know anything about that company?" I felt the world tilt slightly. Haven Enterprises. The name that appeared on my quarterly dividend statements. The company I'd built from nothing after my husband died. The one I'd grown through careful investments and strategic partnerships over the past 15 years. "Why do you ask?" I managed to say. "Because Mila made a big deal about having a corporate sponsor for this party. Said it made everything more prestigious. But she kept talking about how she had no idea who actually owned the company, just that they were generous with local families." I stared at Sarah, my mind reeling. My own company had sponsored the party where my daughter-in-law had humiliated me. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. "That's very interesting," I said quietly. After Sarah left, I sat in my chair as the last guests filtered out. David was helping Mila clean up, both of them looking tired but happy. Neither of them had spoken to me since I'd arrived. Finally, as I was gathering my purse to leave, Mila approached me. Her perfect facade had slipped slightly, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Denise. I hope you had a nice time." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had just shown me exactly how little I mattered to her. But something had changed in me during those hours of exile. A door that had been closed for too long was slowly beginning to open. "It was very enlightening," I said. Mila's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, good. I walked to my car without saying goodbye to David. He was busy stacking chairs and didn't notice me leave. As I drove home through the darkening streets, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation anymore. I was thinking about Haven Enterprises, about Sarah Chun, and about how very little my daughter-in-law actually knew about the woman she just declared war on. Mila had made one crucial mistake tonight. She'd assumed I was powerless. Chapter 2. The Shocking Discovery. The drive home from the gender reveal party felt longer than usual. Every red light gave me more time to replay the evening's humiliation, but by the time I pulled into my modest driveway, something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but it was being slowly consumed by something else entirely. I unlocked the front door of the small house I'd called home for the past 8 years. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a simple 2-bedroom ranch in an older neighborhood. Most people who knew me assumed it was all I could afford on my late husband's pension and my part-time teaching income. They had no idea it was a choice. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and headed straight to my home office. The room looked ordinary enough: a desk, a computer, some family photos. But behind the filing cabinet sat a safe that contained the real story of my life for the past 15 years. My hand shook slightly as I entered the combination. Inside were documents that told a very different story than the one Mila thought she knew. Bank statements, property deeds, incorporation papers, and investment portfolios, all bearing the name of a company I'd built from nothing. Haven Enterprises. I pulled out the latest quarterly report and stared at the numbers. Revenue of $12.7 million. Net profit of $3.1 million. Not bad for a company that started with a $25,000 life insurance payout and a widow's determination to never be dependent on anyone again. When Robert died 15 years ago, I was 58 years old with no real business experience and a son who was just starting his career. The insurance money was meant to be my security blanket, but I'd had a different idea. I used it as seed money to buy my first rental property, a small duplex in a neighborhood everyone said was declining. Everyone was wrong. Over the next 5 years, as the area gentrified, that duplex became worth 4 times what I'd paid for it. I sold it and bought 3 more properties. Then I started buying small businesses, failing restaurants and struggling shops that needed capital and guidance more than they needed new owners. Haven Enterprises grew quietly, almost invisibly. I never wanted attention or recognition. I just wanted security and the freedom to live on my own terms. The company sponsored local events, supported community organizations, and provided grants to small businesses. But I always stayed in the background, letting my lawyers and accountants handle the public face of the business. It was a strategy that had worked perfectly until tonight. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my lawyer's number. Marcus Williams had been handling Haven's legal affairs for 10 years, and I trusted him completely. Marcus, it's Denise. I'm sorry to call so late. Denise, no problem at all. What can I do for you? I need you to pull some information for me about a client we sponsored recently, a gender reveal party for David and Mila Patterson. There was a pause. The Patterson event, yes. That was approved last month under our community outreach program. Is there a problem? Not exactly a problem, but I need to know everything about how that sponsorship came about. Who applied, what information they provided, everything. I can have that for you first thing tomorrow morning. May I ask why? I stared at my reflection in the dark window. Because David Patterson is my son, and his wife just spent the evening treating me like I don't exist. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I see. I'll have those files ready by 8 a.m. After I hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. If Mila wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules she was playing by. I started with social media, scrolling through her perfectly curated Instagram account. Photo after photo showed a life of careful luxury. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country. The captions were full of gratitude for her blessed life and frequent mentions of building our dream together. But something nagged at me as I scrolled. The timeline didn't quite add up. David made good money as an engineer, but not designer handbag every month money. I'd always assumed Mila came from wealth, but looking more carefully at her posts, I started to notice things. The same expensive items appearing over and over, photographed from different angles to look like new purchases. check-ins at upscale restaurants during happy hour when prices were lower. A pattern of borrowed luxury rather than owned wealth. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Mila's maiden name, Mila Rodriguez. Within minutes, I had her LinkedIn profile, her college information, and public records that painted a very different picture than her social media suggested. She'd grown up in a working-class family in Fresno. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a school secretary. She graduated from Cal State with a communications degree and worked a series of entry-level marketing jobs before meeting David. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it didn't match the story she'd been telling about her background. I found an old interview she'd done for her college newspaper, where she talked about her dreams of making it big in the city and marrying into the life she deserved. The phrase stuck with me, the life she deserved, as if comfort and security were things to be claimed rather than earned. By midnight, I had a clearer picture of my daughter-in-law, ambitious, image-conscious, and willing to stretch the truth to maintain appearances. But I still didn't understand how she'd gotten access to Haven Enterprises sponsorship money, or why she'd kept it secret from David. The next morning, I was waiting in Marcus's office when he arrived at 7:45. He handed me a thick manila folder and a cup of coffee. "This is everything we have on the Patterson sponsorship," he said. "And Denise, I think you're going to find it very interesting." I opened the folder and immediately saw why. The application for sponsorship hadn't come from Mila Rodriguez Patterson. It had come from M. Patterson, listed as the spouse of David Patterson, engineer. But the contact information was all Mila's, and the supporting documentation painted a picture of financial hardship that was completely fabricated. She claimed they were struggling to afford the party due to unexpected medical expenses, Marcus explained. Said they wanted to celebrate their first child but couldn't manage the costs on their own. I stared at the application. Medical expenses. David hadn't mentioned any medical problems to me, and he certainly would have if they were significant enough to cause financial strain. "There's more," Marcus said gently. She provided bank statements showing their account balance, but something seemed off to our accountant. She asked me to run a standard verification. He handed me another document. Those bank statements were altered, digitally modified to show lower balances than they actually had. The words hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just lied to get the sponsorship money. She'd committed fraud. Used my own company's generosity to fund the party where she'd humiliated me. "How much did we give them?" I asked. $15,000. It covered the catering, decorations, photography, everything. $15,000. Money that came from my company, that I'd earned through years of careful investment and hard work. Money that Mila had stolen through lies and deception to throw a party where she could treat me like garbage. I sat back in Marcus's chair, my mind racing. What are our options legally? Well, fraud is fraud. We could pursue criminal charges if you wanted to. Or we could demand repayment and threaten legal action if they refuse. But even as he spoke, I knew I wasn't interested in legal remedies. This was bigger than money. This was about Mila thinking she could manipulate and deceive without consequences. This was about her believing she was smarter than everyone around her. "I want you to research her finances more thoroughly," I said. "Everything you can find legally. Credit reports, public records, employment history. And I want to know about any other applications she might have made for grants or sponsorships." Marcus nodded. "What are you thinking?" I stood up and gathered the files. "I'm thinking that Mila has made a career out of manipulating situations to her advantage. And I'm thinking it's time someone taught her what happens when you try to manipulate the wrong person." As I drove home, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I wasn't ready to cut ties with my son, even if his wife had declared war on me. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom. I wanted to call and thank you for coming yesterday. I know Mila can be a little particular about party planning, but it meant a lot to have you there." A little particular. That's how he was explaining away his wife's deliberate cruelty. Of course I wanted to be there. She's going to be my granddaughter. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Mila had this great idea about setting up a college fund for the baby. She found this financial advisor who specializes in education planning, and we're meeting with him this week. My blood went cold. A financial advisor? Yeah, apparently he's helped a lot of young families get started with investing. Mila met him through some community networking thing. Community networking. I'd bet anything it was another sponsorship application. Another sob story designed to get free financial services. That sounds wonderful, I managed to say. You'll let me know how it goes? Of course. Oh, and Mom? Thanks for being so understanding about everything. I know you and Mila don't always see eye to eye, but I appreciate you making an effort. After I hung up, I sat in my driveway for a long time. My son thought I was being understanding. He had no idea that his wife was systematically defrauding local businesses and organizations, using their name and their fabricated financial hardship to get services and money she had no right to claim. But I was going to find out exactly how deep this went. And then I was going to stop it. Because Mila had made one crucial miscalculation. She thought the old woman she'd shoved into exile at her own grandson's party was powerless and irrelevant. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. Chapter 3. The Past Revealed. The week following the gender reveal party, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. Remembering. Not the sanitized version of my past that I shared with acquaintances, but the raw, unvarnished truth of how I'd built Haven Enterprises from the ashes of my old life. I was sitting in my office at home, surrounded by 15 years' worth of financial records, when the memories started flooding back. It began with Robert's funeral, the way everyone had looked at me with such pity. Poor Denise, they'd whispered. What will she do now? She's never worked outside the home. She doesn't know anything about business or money. They were right, of course. At 48, I'd been a traditional wife for 26 years. I'd raised David, managed our household, volunteered at school events, and trusted Robert to handle everything financial. When the heart attack took him, I was completely unprepared for the reality of being alone. The life insurance payout was $25,000. Not much, but enough to keep me afloat for a year or two if I was careful. Everyone expected me to find a small apartment, maybe get a part-time job at a department store, live quietly on whatever savings Robert had left. But sitting in that funeral home, listening to people plan my diminished future for me, something had hardened inside me. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want to spend my remaining years grateful for whatever scraps life offered me. So I did something that shocked everyone, including myself. I used the insurance money to buy a duplex in a rundown neighborhood that everyone said was hopeless. The previous owner was desperate to sell, and I got it for $18,000. I used the remaining $7,000 to make basic repairs and found tenants for both sides. David thought I'd lost my mind. He was 28 then, just starting his engineering career and newly married to his first wife, Susan. They lived in a nice apartment across town and visited me once a week, clearly worried about my mental state. "Mom, you don't know anything about being a landlord," he'd said, standing in the kitchen of my little house while I studied rental law books from the library. What if something goes wrong? What if the tenants don't pay? What if the building needs major repairs? Then I'll figure it out, I'd told him. I'm not dead yet, David. I'm just getting started. He didn't understand it then, and I wasn't sure I understood it myself. All I knew was that I refused to become the helpless widow everyone expected me to be. The duplex was profitable within 6 months. Not hugely profitable, but enough to prove that I could do this. I spent every free moment learning about real estate, reading investment books, attending seminars for small business owners. When David's marriage fell apart 2 years later, he was too wrapped up in his own problems to pay much attention to what his mother was doing. That was probably for the best. By then, I'd bought 2 more properties and was starting to look at small businesses that needed capital. My strategy was simple. Find good people who needed help, provide that help quietly, and take a reasonable profit without drawing attention to myself. The restaurant was my first big success. Giuseppe's had been a family-owned Italian place for 30 years, but the original owner was getting old and his sons weren't interested in taking over. The business was profitable but needed modernization and fresh capital to compete with the chain restaurants moving into the area. I offered to become a silent partner, providing the money they needed in exchange for 51% ownership. Giuseppe stayed on as manager, kept his same staff, maintained the family recipes. But I upgraded the kitchen equipment, refreshed the dining room, and implemented modern business practices that doubled their revenue within a year. Nobody knew I owned Giuseppe's. I ate there occasionally, always paying full price, always tipping well. Giuseppe and I had an understanding. He ran the restaurant, I stayed invisible, and we both profited from the arrangement. That became my template. Over the next decade, I acquired stakes in a dozen small businesses throughout the city. A dry cleaner, a bakery, 2 coffee shops, a small accounting firm, a florist. None of them knew about the others. Each thought they were my only investment. I also continued buying real estate, but I was selective. I looked for properties that others overlooked, buildings with good bones in neighborhoods that were poised for growth. I bought them cheap, improved them carefully, and either sold them for substantial profits or kept them as rental income. Haven Enterprises was incorporated 8 years ago, when my collection of investments had grown large enough to need professional management. Even Marcus, my lawyer, didn't know the full extent of what I owned. He handled the corporate paperwork, but I kept the detailed records myself. By the time David met Mila 3 years ago, I was worth over $8 million. But I still lived in my modest house, still drove my 10-year-old Honda, still shopped at discount stores and clipped coupons. It wasn't because I was cheap. It was because I'd learned that real power came from being underestimated. Now, sitting with Marcus's research spread across my desk, I was starting to understand just how much Mila had underestimated me. Her financial deception went far beyond the gender reveal party sponsorship. She'd been systematically applying for grants, sponsorships, and financial assistance programs for over 2 years. The Community Foundation had given her $1,500 for baby supplies for struggling new parents. The Women's Business Network had provided marketing services worth $3,000 for a small business startup that didn't exist. The local food bank's Family Assistance Program had been providing monthly grocery vouchers based on fabricated financial hardship. Each application painted the same picture: a young couple struggling to make ends meet despite their best efforts. David's income was consistently understated, their expenses exaggerated. Medical bills that didn't exist, car repairs that never happened, family emergencies that were pure fiction. The documentation was sophisticated. Bank statements that had been digitally altered, medical bills created from templates, even fake correspondence from David's employer suggesting his job was in jeopardy. She'd created an entire alternate reality where she and my son were barely scraping by. But what disturbed me most was how she'd used my son's reputation to sell these lies. David was well known in the local engineering community, respected for his work on several high-profile public projects. Mila had leveraged his good name to lend credibility to her fraud schemes. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus again. "I need you to do something for me," I said when he answered. "I want you to contact every organization that Mila has received money or services from. Tell them you're conducting a routine audit of Haven Enterprises community partnerships, and you need verification of their current financial status. Are you planning to expose the fraud?" "Not yet. I want to understand the full scope first. And Marcus, I want you to start documenting everything. Every lie, every fabricated document, every dollar she's taken under false pretenses. Planning for legal action?" I stared out my window at the quiet street where I'd chosen to live invisibly for so many years. Planning for justice. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to Giuseppe's restaurant for lunch. Giuseppe himself was at the hostess station when I walked in, and his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Patterson, so good to see you. Your usual table." I nodded and followed him to a small table by the window. Giuseppe had always treated me like a favorite customer, never letting on that I owned half his business. It was part of our unspoken agreement. "How is your son?" he asked as he poured my water. "I heard congratulations are in order." Word traveled fast in a small community. Yes, David and his wife are expecting their first child. A little girl. Wonderful news. You must be so excited to be a grandmother. I smiled, but it felt hollow. Yes, it's quite an adjustment for all of us. After Giuseppe left, I sat alone with my thoughts and my linguine. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, filled with the kind of working people who reminded me of my younger self. They had no idea that the elderly woman eating alone by the window owned the place where they were enjoying their meals. That invisibility had been my greatest asset for 15 years. It had allowed me to build an empire while everyone around me saw only a quiet widow living on a pension. But now Mila had forced me into a position where I might have to give up that anonymity. The question was whether it would be worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom, just wanted to let you know that we met with the financial advisor today. He's going to help us set up a really comprehensive plan for the baby's future. Mila is so excited about getting our finances organized. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should. As I drove home, I made a decision. Mila thought she was smart enough to manipulate the system, to take advantage of generous people and organizations without consequences. She thought she could treat me like an irrelevant old woman, while building her perfect life on a foundation of lies. She was about to learn that some foundations are less stable than others. And sometimes, the quiet old woman in the corner is the one holding all the cards. Chapter 4. The Silent Strategy. The morning I decided to dismantle Mila's carefully constructed world, I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was something much more dangerous, purpose. I made my coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. Just like I'd done 15 years ago when I was planning my first real estate investment. Back then I'd been desperate and scared. Now I was methodical and patient. The difference between those two states of mind I'd learned was everything. At the top of the page, I wrote Project Accountability in my careful handwriting. Below that, I drew 3 columns: financial, social, and professional. Mila had built her fraudulent empire across all 3 areas. If I was going to bring it down, I needed to be just as systematic. My first call was to Marcus, who picked up on the second ring despite the early hour. Denise, I was hoping you'd call. I have the preliminary results from our audit inquiries. And it's worse than we thought. We've identified at least 23 separate instances of fraudulent applications over the past 2.5 years. Total value is approaching $40,000 in cash and services. I wrote the number on my pad, circling it twice. $40,000. Mila had stolen enough money to buy a luxury car, all while playing the struggling young mother to anyone who would listen. There's something else, Marcus continued. 3 of the organizations have asked if we want to file formal complaints. Apparently, they've been suspicious for a while, but didn't have enough evidence to act. Not yet, I said. I want to handle this my way first. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and began what I privately called Phase 1. Over the next 2 hours, I made a series of phone calls that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew me. My first call was to Patricia Wong, who owned a chain of high-end boutiques throughout the city. I'd helped her expand her business 5 years ago, when she needed capital for a 3rd location. She didn't know I was her silent partner, but she knew me as a customer and thought of me as a sweet old lady who occasionally bought gifts for her daughter-in-law. Patricia, it's Denise Patterson. I hope I'm not calling too early. Denise. Not at all. How can I help you? I have a question about that young woman I've seen in your store a few times. Tall brunette. Very fashionable? I think her name is Mila. Oh yes, Mila Patterson. She's one of our VIP customers. Lovely girl, though between you and me, I sometimes wonder how she affords our prices on a teacher's salary. I paused. A teacher's salary? That's what she told me when she applied for our store credit program. Said she was an elementary school teacher married to an engineer, and they were saving every penny for their first baby. I felt so bad for her that I approved her for our maximum credit line. Elementary school teacher. Another lie to add to the growing list. Mila hadn't worked since marrying David, something she conveniently omitted when applying for credit. That's very generous of you, Patricia. I'm sure she appreciates it. Well, to be honest, I'm starting to have some concerns. She's maxed out her credit limit, and the payments have been irregular. But every time I call about it, she has another story about unexpected expenses or delayed paychecks. I see. Well, I won't keep you. Thank you for the chat. After I hung up, I made a note on my legal pad. Patricia's boutiques were struggling with the economic downturn, and bad debt was hurting her cash flow. Mila's unpaid bills were probably causing real problems for a business I had a stake in protecting. My second call was to Dr. Elizabeth Chan, a pediatrician who ran a successful practice downtown. We'd known each other for years through various community organizations, though she had no idea about my business interests. Elizabeth, it's Denise Patterson. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. Denise, how wonderful to hear from you. I was just thinking about you the other day when I saw the announcement about your son's baby. That's actually why I'm calling. I wanted to ask about something, but I hope it doesn't sound too forward. Of course, ask away. David's wife mentioned that they've been having some medical expenses related to the pregnancy. Nothing serious, I hope, but I wondered if you might know anything about it. As the grandmother-to-be, I worry. There was a pause. Medical expenses? But Denise, Mila hasn't been my patient. She's actually been very vocal about using that new concierge medical service downtown. The expensive one that caters to affluent families. Another lie. The medical expenses that Mila had claimed on multiple grant applications didn't exist. Instead, she was paying premium prices for boutique medical care while claiming poverty everywhere else. Oh, I must have misunderstood, I said. You know how these things get confused in family conversations. Of course. But please, if they need any help or have questions about the pregnancy, I'd be happy to see her. Family discount, naturally. My third call was the most important one. Jennifer Morrison was the director of the Community Foundation, the organization that had provided multiple grants to Mila over the past 2 years. Jennifer and I had served together on the library board a decade ago, and she trusted my judgment. Jennifer, I'm calling about something delicate, and I hope you'll keep our conversation confidential. Of course, Denise. What's troubling you? It's about my daughter-in-law, Mila Patterson. I understand she's received some assistance from your foundation. Yes, we've helped the Patterson family several times. Such a sweet young woman, and they've really been struggling financially. It's heartbreaking to see educated people working so hard and still barely making ends meet. Jennifer, I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll hear me out completely before you respond. I spent the next 10 minutes laying out everything I knew about Mila's financial deceptions. Jennifer's responses went from surprise to concern to outright anger, as I provided specific details about the fabricated documents and false claims. Are you absolutely certain about this? She asked finally. I have copies of altered bank statements, medical bills for treatments that never happened, and employment verification letters for jobs that don't exist. This isn't a misunderstanding, Jennifer. It's systematic fraud. What do you want me to do? I want you to quietly verify everything I've told you, and then I want you to wait for my signal before taking any action. There are other organizations involved, and I think we need a coordinated response. Denise, why are you handling this yourself instead of going to the police? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Because this isn't just about money, Jennifer. This is about my granddaughter growing up with parents who think lying and stealing are acceptable ways to get what they want. I need to handle this in a way that protects my son and that baby. After I hung up, I sat back and reviewed my notes. 3 phone calls, and I'd already started unraveling Mila's web of deception. But this was just the beginning. The next phase would require me to use resources I'd kept hidden for years. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in months. Richardson Investigative Services, this is Tom. Tom, it's Denise Patterson. I need your help with something. Tom Richardson was a former police detective who'd started his own private investigation firm after retiring from the force. I'd hired him 5 years ago to do background checks on potential business partners, and he'd proven to be thorough and discreet. Mrs. Patterson, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I need a comprehensive investigation into someone's background and current activities. Financial, employment, social media. Everything you can find legally. Routine business matter? Family matter. And Tom? This one is personal. We arranged to meet that afternoon at his office. As I prepared to leave the house, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was still the same quiet widow that everyone in the neighborhood knew. But something had changed in my eyes. There was a hardness there that hadn't been present a week ago. Mila had awakened something in me that I'd kept carefully controlled for 15 years. She'd made the mistake of thinking that kindness was the same as weakness, that quiet meant powerless. She was about to learn the difference between a woman who chose to be underestimated and a woman who actually was. But first I had one more call to make. I dialed David's number, and when he answered, I put on my brightest grandmother voice. Hi, sweetheart. I was wondering if you and Mila would like to come to dinner this weekend. I'd love to cook for you and we could talk about the baby. That sounds great, Mom. Mila's been saying we should spend more time with you. Has she now? Wonderful. Saturday at 6. Perfect. And Mom? Thanks for making an effort with Mila. I know she can be particular, but she really does care about family. After I hung up, I smiled for the first time in days. Saturday dinner would give me a chance to observe Mila up close, to see how she behaved when she thought she was in control of the situation. She had no idea that she was walking into the home of a woman who'd spent 15 years learning how to destroy her enemies so quietly that they never saw it coming. The game was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 5: Mila's Collapse. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I'd spent the morning preparing dinner with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to hostile business takeovers. Pot roast, David's favorite since childhood. Fresh bread from the bakery I secretly owned. Apple pie made from scratch, because I wanted Mila to see exactly what kind of woman she'd chosen to underestimate. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, David carrying a bottle of wine and Mila clutching a designer purse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was wearing one of those flowing maternity dresses that cost a fortune to look effortlessly casual. Her hair styled in perfect waves that spoke of expensive salon visits. Mom, the house smells incredible, David said, giving me a warm hug. I haven't had your pot roast in years. It's been too long since I cooked for you, I replied, then turned to Mila with my most grandmotherly smile. How are you feeling, dear? You look radiant. Mila's smile was as plastic as ever, but I caught something new in her eyes. Stress. The kind that came from trying to keep too many lies straight at once. I'm doing well, thank you. The second trimester has been much easier than the first. We settled in the living room while the roast finished cooking. David immediately launched into work stories, and I listened with genuine interest while keeping one eye on Mila. She kept checking her phone, her fingers drumming against her purse with nervous energy. Everything all right, sweetheart? David asked, noticing her distraction. Oh, just some issues with the wedding photographer from Sarah's baby shower last month. She's being difficult about payment terms. I nearly smiled. Sarah-chan, the photographer from the gender reveal party, had called me 3 days ago. Mila had hired her for another event, and was now claiming the photos were unsatisfactory to avoid paying the full bill. Sarah had asked for my advice on how to handle clients who tried to manipulate their way out of paying for services. I'd given her some very specific guidance. That's frustrating, I said sympathetically. What seems to be the problem? Mila's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She's demanding full payment even though half the photos are unusable. I think she's trying to take advantage of us because we're young. Have you considered getting a second opinion? I asked innocently. Sometimes these disputes can be resolved with an objective third party. We can't afford a lawyer right now, Mila said quickly. With the baby coming and David's work situation being uncertain. David frowned. My work situation isn't uncertain. Where did that come from? A flush crept up Mila's neck. I just meant, with the economy and everything. Nothing is really secure these days. I excused myself to check on dinner, but I was really giving Mila a moment to dig herself deeper into whatever hole she was creating. From the kitchen, I could hear David's voice becoming more confused as Mila tried to explain her comment about his job security. The past week had been productive. Tom Richardson's investigation had uncovered even more fraudulent applications than Marcus had found, and he'd also discovered some interesting patterns in Mila's spending. She was living far beyond any reasonable budget, even with David's good salary and the money she'd stolen through false claims. More importantly, the organizations she'd defrauded were starting to compare notes. Jennifer Morrison from the Community Foundation had quietly reached out to other local nonprofits, and they discovered that Mila's sob stories were remarkably consistent across applications. The same fabricated medical emergencies, the same claims of job insecurity, the same pleas for help from struggling young parents. But it was Patricia Wong's call 2 days ago that had really set things in motion. Denise, I need to thank you for our conversation last week. It prompted me to look more closely at Mila Patterson's account. Oh, she owes us over $8,000, And when I called about it, she claimed David had been laid off and they were facing foreclosure. But I happened to run into David at the coffee shop yesterday, and he seemed very happy about a promotion he just received. That's wonderful news about his promotion, I'd said carefully. Yes, but it made me realize she's been lying to me for months. I've filed a complaint with the credit bureau, and I'm considering legal action. That conversation had been the final piece I needed. Mila's house of cards was already starting to collapse, and she didn't even realize it yet. I called them in for dinner, and we gathered around my small dining table. David complimented the food enthusiastically, but Mila barely touched her plate. She kept glancing at her phone and making nervous small talk about the baby's nursery plans. We're thinking of hiring an interior designer, she said, cutting her meat into tiny pieces she didn't eat. I found this amazing woman who specializes in luxury nurseries. That sounds expensive, I observed mildly. Well, we want the best for our daughter. David's been working so hard, and he deserves to have his child grow up in a beautiful environment. David looked uncomfortable. Mila, we haven't really talked about hiring a designer. That wasn't in our budget discussions. I thought we could use some of the money from our new investment advisor. He said we have more available than we thought. I set down my fork carefully. Investment advisor? The one I mentioned to you, Mom. He's been helping us restructure our finances to prepare for the baby. Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of restructuring? Mila answered before David could speak. He's helping us consolidate some debt and access our equity more efficiently. Very sophisticated financial planning. Debt consolidation, I repeated. I wasn't aware you had significant debt. David's frown deepened. We don't have significant debt. Our mortgage, the car loans, normal stuff. The credit cards, Mila said quickly. From all the baby preparations and medical expenses. What medical expenses? David asked. Our insurance has covered everything. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Mila's face had gone pale, and her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her water glass. I meant the supplements and prenatal vitamins, she said weakly. Those add up. But David wasn't buying it anymore. I could see the confusion in his eyes turning into something sharper, more suspicious. Mila, what debt are you talking about? I review our accounts every month. We don't have credit card debt. Maybe we should discuss this at home, Mila said, her voice strained. No, let's discuss it now. David's engineering mind was engaging, the same methodical thinking that had made him successful in his career. What credit cards? What medical expenses? What investment advisor? Mila looked trapped, her perfect composure finally cracking. David, please. Not in front of your mother. Actually, I said quietly, I think this is exactly where this conversation needs to happen. They both turned to look at me, and I saw the moment when Mila realized that something had shifted. The sweet, harmless grandmother was gone, replaced by someone much more dangerous. What do you mean, Mom? I excused myself and returned with a manila folder that I placed on the table between us. I mean that your wife has been systematically defrauding local organizations for over 2 years, using fabricated financial hardship and forged documents to steal money and services. David's face went white. What are you talking about? I opened the folder and spread out copies of Mila's fraudulent applications, the altered bank statements, the fake medical bills. I'm talking about the $47,000 she's stolen by claiming you're struggling financially, while living a lifestyle that costs more than your combined actual income. Mila shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. David, she's lost her mind. But David was staring at the documents, his engineering brain processing the evidence with devastating precision. These bank statements. Mila, these numbers are wrong. Our account has never been this low. She digitally altered them, I said calmly, along with employment verification letters claiming your job was in jeopardy, medical bills for treatments that never happened, and expense reports for emergencies that were pure fiction. You're lying, Mila whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. David picked up one of the applications, reading it slowly. This says I might be laid off due to budget cuts. Mila, I got a promotion 6 months ago. This says we're behind on our mortgage. We've never missed a payment. I can explain. Then explain, David said. his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Explain why you told the community foundation that we couldn't afford groceries while you were buying $800 handbags. Explain why you claimed medical emergencies to get money for a gender reveal party that cost $15,000. Mila's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. The confident, manipulative woman who dismissed me as irrelevant was revealing herself to be nothing more than a frightened fraud who'd finally been caught. Everything I did was for us, she said desperately. For our family. For our daughter. You stole from organizations that help people who actually need it, I said quietly. You took money meant for families who were genuinely struggling while you lived in luxury, and looked down on people like me. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. How long has this been going on? It doesn't matter, Mila said, tears starting to flow. None of it matters. We can pay it back. With what money? David asked. The money you've been stealing? The fake investment advisor? What else have you lied about, Mila? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The truth was written across her face in mascara-streaked tears and shaking hands. My son looked at me across the dinner table. And I saw the exact moment when he understood that his mother had just saved him from a woman who would have destroyed his life one lie at a time. Chapter 6. The Final Revelation. The silence in my dining room stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the sound of Mila's ragged breathing and the gentle tick of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. David sat frozen, staring at the evidence spread across my table like pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a picture he couldn't deny. Mila made one last desperate attempt to regain control. David, you can't believe this. She's been waiting for a chance to destroy our marriage since the day we met. She's always resented me. I almost felt sorry for her. Even now, caught in a web of lies so extensive it would take months to untangle, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. Still trying to make herself the victim. Actually, I said quietly, I think it's time you knew the whole truth. I stood up and walked to my china cabinet, retrieving a business card I'd kept there for occasions that required absolute clarity. I placed it on the table next to the fraud evidence. David picked it up, his frown deepening as he read. Haven Enterprises. Chief Executive Officer, Denise Patterson. He looked up at me, confusion replacing anger for a moment. Mom, what is this? It's my company, I said simply. The one that sponsored your gender reveal party. The one Mila defrauded to pay for the event where she humiliated me. The color drained from both their faces, but for very different reasons. That's impossible, Mila whispered. You're just You live in this tiny house. You drive an old car. You can't own a company. I own 12 businesses in this city, I continued, my voice steady and calm. 3 apartment complexes, 2 office buildings, and an investment portfolio worth approximately $8.4 million. Haven Enterprises has been operating for 8 years. And yes, we do sponsor community events for families in need. David's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak but couldn't find words. The irony, I said, settling back into my chair, is that Mila stole money from my own company to throw a party where she could treat me like I was worthless. She used my generosity against me while making sure I knew exactly how little I meant to her. This isn't real, Mila said, shaking her head violently. You're making this up to get revenge. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately. Marcus, I'm with David and Mila. Could you please verify my identity for them? I put the phone on speaker as Marcus's professional voice filled the room. This is Marcus Williams, attorney for Haven Enterprises. I'm speaking with Denise Patterson, who founded and owns Haven Enterprises, one of the most successful private investment companies in the region. Mila slumped back in her chair as if she'd been physically struck. Additionally, Marcus continued, Mrs. Patterson has asked me to inform you that Haven Enterprises will not be pursuing criminal charges at this time, provided that full restitution is made within 30 days for all fraudulent claims. Thank you, Marcus, I said, ending the call. David was staring at me like I was a stranger. Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you ever tell me? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for days. Because I learned a long time ago that money changes how people see you. When your father died, everyone assumed I'd become a burden, someone to be pitied and managed. I decided I preferred being underestimated. But why tell us now? I looked at Mila, who was crying silently, her perfect makeup streaked down her cheeks. Because your wife made a choice at that party. She could have treated me with basic human decency, could have acknowledged that I'm your mother and your daughter's grandmother. Instead, she made it clear that in her world I didn't matter. Denise, Mila said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You're sorry you got caught, I corrected. If I were actually the powerless old woman you thought I was, you'd still be stealing from charities and treating me like garbage. David finally found his voice. Mila, is it true? All of it. She couldn't look at him. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a little help when things were tight. But then it got easier, and the money let us live the life I thought we deserved. The life you thought we deserved, David repeated slowly. By stealing from people who actually needed help. I was thinking about our future. About giving our daughter the best of everything. By committing fraud, I said. By teaching her that lying and stealing are acceptable when you want something you can't afford. The fight went out of Mila all at once. She slouched in her chair, looking smaller and younger than I'd ever seen her. What happens now? I've been thinking about that question for days. The woman sitting across from me had stolen money, yes, but she was also carrying my granddaughter. Whatever happened next would affect that innocent child. That depends, I said carefully. On you and on David. David looked between us, his face a map of confusion and betrayal. I need time to think about all of this. Of course you do, I said. But David, there are some things you need to know before you make any decisions. I reached into my folder and pulled out Tom Richardson's final report. Your wife has been doing this for over 2 years. The total amount stolen is closer to $60,000 when you include services and goods obtained fraudulently. And David, she's been using your name and reputation to make her lies more credible. He took the report with shaking hands. My reputation? Every application claimed that David Patterson, the respected engineer, was struggling financially. She used your professional standing to gain sympathy and credibility for her stories. People at work, David said slowly. The way some of them have been treating me lately, like they felt sorry for me. I thought it was weird. She's been telling people you might be laid off, that you're having marriage troubles, that you're struggling with debt. Your professional network thinks you're falling apart. The betrayal in David's eyes was complete now. Mila hadn't just stolen money. She damaged his career and reputation in ways that could take years to repair. I'll fix it, Mila said desperately. I'll call everyone, tell them it was a misunderstanding. You'll tell them you lied, I corrected. About everything. Mila's phone rang, and she glanced at it with panic in her eyes. It's Patricia from the boutique. Answer it, I said. Put it on speaker. With trembling fingers, Mila accepted the call. Patricia's voice was crisp and professional. Mila, I'm calling to inform you that we've closed your account and forwarded your case to our collections department. The full balance of $8,400 is due immediately, and we'll be reporting this to the credit bureaus. Patricia, please, I can explain. There's nothing to explain. We know about the other businesses you've defrauded, and we're coordinating our response with them. You'll be hearing from our attorney. The call ended, and Mila looked at me with something approaching terror. How many of them know? All of them, I said simply. They've been comparing notes since Monday. David set down the investigator's report and looked at his wife with eyes that held no warmth. Pack a bag tonight. You can stay at your sister's while I figure out what I'm going to do. David, please. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby, he said quietly. I'm thinking about what kind of mother she's going to have. Mila turned to me one last time, desperation making her voice shrill. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To destroy my marriage. I considered the question seriously. What I wanted was to be treated with basic respect at my grandson's gender reveal party. What I wanted was to not be humiliated by someone who was stealing from my own company to pay for the event. What I wanted was a daughter-in-law who didn't think fraud was an acceptable way to fund her lifestyle. I stood up and began clearing the dinner dishes, the normal domestic task somehow restoring order to the chaos. What happens next is up to you and David. But Mila, understand this. I will be in my granddaughter's life. I will not be hidden away or treated as an embarrassment. I will not be relegated to folding chairs in backyards, while you pose for pictures with my family. And if I refuse? I smiled, and it wasn't a grandmother's gentle smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd built an empire from nothing, and learned how to protect what mattered to her. Then you'll discover that the quiet old woman you dismissed as irrelevant has resources you can't imagine and patience you shouldn't test. David walked Mila to their car in silence. Through my kitchen window, I watched them have what was clearly a heated conversation in my driveway. When David came back to the door alone, his face looked older than it had that morning. "She's going to her sister's," he said quietly. "I told her I need space to think." "That's wise. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? About the business, the money, any of it?" I hugged my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and hardworking, who'd chosen a woman who was neither. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. And because I learned that real power isn't in what people know about you. It's in what they don't know." 3 months later, I sat in the passenger seat of David's car as we drove to the courthouse. He'd filed for divorce the week after our dinner, and today it would be final. Mila had fought it initially, but the mounting legal pressure from her fraud victims had convinced her to accept his terms. She would receive supervised visitation with the baby once she was born, but David would have primary custody. She would enter a financial counseling program and make restitution to all the organizations she defrauded. And she would never again use the Patterson name in any financial applications or business dealings. "You know," David said as we walked up the courthouse steps, "I keep thinking about something you said that night." "What's that?" "About real power being in what people don't know about you." "I think I understand that now." I smiled, linking my arm through his. "It took me 63 years to learn that lesson. I hope you learn it faster than I did." 6 months later, I held my granddaughter for the first time in the nursery David had decorated himself. She was perfect, with his eyes and what looked like it might be my stubborn chin. I rocked her gently while he slept in the chair beside us, exhausted from 22 hours of labor support. The room was simple and beautiful, furnished with love rather than stolen money. On the dresser sat a framed photo from that first Christmas, David and me and baby Emma by my little Christmas tree. We looked like what we were, a family. Mila saw Emma twice a month under court supervision. She'd gotten a job at a marketing firm and was slowly paying back the money she'd stolen. She was required to attend therapy and financial counseling, and by all accounts she was trying to rebuild her life honestly. I hoped she would succeed for Emma's sake, but I also knew that some lessons come with permanent consequences. As for me, I went back to being the quiet widow who lived in the small house and drove the old car. My neighbors still had no idea that the unassuming woman who brought them soup when they were sick owned half the businesses on Main Street. But now David knew. And Emma would grow up knowing that her grandmother was a woman who'd built something from nothing, who'd learned that kindness wasn't weakness and that quiet strength was often the most powerful force of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or public. Sometimes it's simply living well, loving fiercely, and making sure that the people who matter know exactly who they can count on. In the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world.